Hi, I'm Jocelyn Kochi, and today's tutorial is for a late elementary piece called Samantha Dances the Tarantella. In the Australian and New Zealand grading system, if you're using the AMEB or ANZCA, this is a first grade level piece. If you're using the ABRSM, it's a second grade level, and that would be for most people in Asia and the UK. It comes from a collection called A Pinch of This, A Dash of That, which are 8 pieces which range from pre-preliminary through to second grade, so that would be mid-elementary through to probably early intermediate. So, Tarantella. In my experience, most people, whether they're children or adults, love to play dances, and in particular the tarantella with its bright, snappy rhythms. So when I'm writing tarantellas and dances like this, which are fast, it gives me a unique opportunity to present some extra pedagogical aims. So alongside the fact that I know that these students want to play this music fast, I know that they're going to most probably work hard at getting the notes and the fingering down pat so that they can play it fast. So in most cases they will really work at a slower tempo to get through the difficult and challenging sections. But it also allows me to put in some other technical things, and in this case I've added areas where we have maybe legato in one hand and notes having to repeat or disconnect in the other hand. This is quite a challenging feat for students at this level. By the time most students have reached intermediate level, they're really quite comfortable with that whole disparity between the hands, where one hand is playing legato and the other hand is playing detached notes. At this elementary level or late elementary level, it's still quite challenging for most students. They'll be starting to crack it, but in some cases it'll be easier than others. And I've got both in this piece. I've got some easier ones that are more manageable, and I've got some more challenging ones. So I'll go over some of the strategies for those shortly, and you can see how you can actually deal with those situations, not only in this piece but in any pieces that you're teaching that have this sort of problem, this sort of challenge coming up. Another thing about the tempo, which I'll just say, is although this is a fairly fast piece, it's at 100 beats per minute, if the students, even though they like to hear it fast, if they can't actually master the speed at the end, even though they're trying, it doesn't really seem to bother them most of the time. They're usually quite happy to play it through at a slower tempo, and they still feel quite good about what they're playing and how they're playing it. Okay, so I'll play it through now, and then I'll come back and talk about those things. Okay, so the first and most obvious problem that's going to come up when looking at the score or looking at me playing that is that if this is for children, or for anyone in fact with small hands, the first problem they're going to have is with those octave leaps that are marked as slurs. It's not advisable to encourage children or anyone with small hands to stretch these, and it's not necessary, it's not healthy for them. It's really quite a simple matter for them to disconnect those notes. And this has a second advantage in that it helps to prevent the student from, I think it just forges a skill going on that helps to stop students from thinking about connecting phrasing where it's not appropriate, and when they become a bit lazy, you know, when they stretch their hands or drag their hands from the end of one phrase to the beginning of another. Giving them opportunities in pieces like this where they can just leap from one place to another, gives them more comfort with being able to let go of the keys and get away from the keyboard. So this is going to present its own challenges in the early stages because until they've actually got the notes really, really under their fingers, while they're still reliant on the score, it's going to be quite difficult, obviously, to be looking from the sheet music. You know, they're not going to get that at any sort of good timing. But after they've got the notes pretty much down pat and they've got a fair bit of memory coming in there, then they'll be able to focus on what their fingers are doing, and they'll be watching to see that they can jump accurately from one octave to the next. The next issue that you're likely to come across is the fingering changes in the right hand. So this happens right in the first line. So you will see we have 2, 3, thumb, and then instead of going to second finger, they're going to their third finger. And again here to the third finger rather than the second finger. Now there are very good reasons for this. The first is that they need to get into a comfortable position for the next part of the sequence. And then for this next section, it's so that they can get to their fifth finger in preparation for that octave leap. Now, whether they are connecting that octave or not is irrelevant. Even if they're not connecting it, they still don't want to be encouraged to be jumping that from a fourth finger or to be stretching in any way from a fourth finger, which is even worse than a fifth, all the way down to an octave. So they need to be in a good position to go from 5 to 1 in here. So what often happens with my students at any rate, and I'm sure yours as well, is that they will do this. Press their second finger, oops, change to third finger. And that leads into bad habits. So I don't actually allow my students to make corrections at all in this situation. They need to, if they put their second finger down and change it, they've got to go back and do it again. And get it down straight onto the third finger. And every time they go to 2 and correct, I have them go back and repeat it again. Sounds really mean, but I think it's important to get them to focus on what they're doing, because quite often, especially children, they tend to be off with the fairies a little bit and they're not really focusing on what they're doing, and this forces them to focus so that they're not having to keep repeating, so that they're actually putting it down on the correct finger first time every time and not just correcting it when they do it. Now that happens in several places throughout. So what I would normally do is highlight that third finger with a coloured pencil so that they can actually see it coming, and that draws their attention to it. The next problem that you're going to have is when it comes to putting the hands together in this first page. We've got now you've got a left hand that's lifting while the right hand has to connect. Now that's not really going to pose a problem where you've got these octave leaps, because it's consistent and they're consistently doing something in one hand that they're also doing in the other hand. When it comes to changing over and the left hand has to disconnect while the right hand connects, it's really changing over the whole way that their brain has been working, so it's very complicated. So we're going from this So what I do here is I put a little tick, like an up bow, before the note that has to lift, excuse me, and at the place that it has to lift, at the exact position it has to lift. And I just work on that one place at a time. So if we move from the staccato here, and then we've got the opposite, the right hand goes down, the left hand has to lift, and the right hand stays. So I do that a couple of times over. Once they've got the hang of that, we go into the next note. So then it's going to go down again. And that needs to be gone over several times until it's comfortable and fluid. And then you can move into the next bar. Same thing again. This is back to the first part again. Then it repeats. Left hand lifts, right hand holds. Right hand holds. Oh, sorry, left hand, both hands hold here. Right hand holds, left hand lifts. That's really tricky. That's like doing this, you know, rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time. So that's going to be really, really challenging. The next place that happens is even more intense is in the top of the second page. It's the beginning of the B section. And I'll just play through it to show you what's happening there. So we finished off. And then it repeats. Very, very nasty. So I break that up into a couple of different sections. So because it's fairly consistent from bar 15 onwards, then I will keep, from halfway through bar 14 onwards, then I will keep that bit together. Down, up, down, up, down, up. And again. Down, up, down, up, down, up, and off. Now the section before that, bar 13 and 14, is more tricky because you've come off the right hand. And then here in the next section, you've got the left hand staccatoing and the right hand having to hold. But it's only going to hold for a little longer, then it lifts as the right hand plays. Very, very complicated stuff, this. So take it really a small section at a time. Up, and then stop and think. I always tell my students to stop and think, take their time to work out what they're going to do before they play it. Right hand is going to hold, left hand's going to staccato. And before they do anything else, the left hand's going to hold, the right hand's going to lift. Hold that, think about what comes next, put down both together, and then this is the bit that they've already worked on. So they're going to be okay with that once they've worked that over first. So it's the first couple of, the first two bars really where the problems are going to be. Now there are a couple of ways that you can work with that. One is to cover up everything that you don't want them to see. So I would be covering up the to the end of, I'd be covering up until the end of the bar so they can't see what's happening, they just know they're going to lift here, and then I would uncover the first notes of the next bar and nothing else so they can see they're going to staccato and hold. Then I would uncover just the one note that comes next in the left hand so they can see they're going to hold that while they lift the right hand. And then I would uncover the next three notes, no, the next one note. They're all going down together. Then they can see the next two notes going to lift. Oh, and then they've got this bit, hopefully down pat, because that's the bit I would work on first. So the other thing to do, if that's really not working, and for some students they will get this easily, for some students it will be more difficult, and for some it's going to be really, really difficult. For the students for whom it's really, really difficult, I'd take out notes or chords. So what I would do is finish off that. And just put in the first beat of each bar. or the second beat of each bar and not the first. So you could do it the other way around or do both. You could do both. Do the first way a couple of times and then, or quite a few times, and then do the other way a few times, and then maybe just start putting one note or one chord back in at a time. So just add a little bit in at a time as the student can manage it. You need to be fairly creative with things like this, I think, to work out what's the best way that you can help children or adults to work through really, really difficult, tricky technical issues, technical problems. Okay, so that's the main issues through this piece. The other thing that I find that there sometimes are problems with is these scale runs. They, in themselves, they don't pose any real problems, but what I often get is this. And even with a decrescendo there, they land heavily on that last note. So I want them to land off on an upward sweep lightly. So how do I get them to do that? I get them to find, if they know that their hand has to drop somewhere beforehand in order to enable their hand to roll, to come off lightly, then they've got to find a place where it's appropriate for their hands to drop. And I do this with phrasing with all of my students, with all early level students until they've mastered phrasing, with all of the works that they're playing. So it's much easier with one hand, especially when the phrasing is only in one hand. So in the right hand, they can perhaps work out that their thumb seems to be a really good place to drop, and then they can roll into the last note. And in the left hand, probably the thumb as well works. But when it's together, they're in different places, so that's not going to work. So probably the D is a good place. So if they do that, that will help them to not come down hard on that last note of the phrase. With the same thing with the second one. Because even though it's not actually going to roll off, the note still has to be light and gentle when it's landed on at that point. Okay, so then following on from that, this is all the same. Same issues. Highlight the fingering changes. Now the coda. The coda has a couple of issues. It starts off both hands in the same direction and pretty much the same fingering, so that's easy. They move to, both hands move from thumb to second finger. In the left hand it moves a third, in the right hand a fourth. You've got the same thing of the left hand having to lift while the right hand connects. Whether the second E is connected to the next A or whether it's also disconnected is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It's shown phrased, but it's really not important. Repeated an octave higher for the right hand, and as the hands open out, it's really more difficult for students to really see what's going on. They find it much more complicated having the hands further apart because they can't really keep their eyes too much on what one hand's doing and what the other hand's doing. I can see you can't see my hands there. Let me put this down a little. Is that better? Okay, so let's... So they're trying to look at both hands at a time, but it's doing the same thing. A repeated note, but this time to the thumb. Now that seems to be excruciatingly difficult for most students to change from their third finger to their thumb at that point. I don't know why, but you will always get this. Stay third finger. If they realise they've got to go down, they'll suddenly change to thumb and go. Or they'll go back up to the high A again where they've gone before. So in the previous section they've gone from this E to this A, and so they want to do the same thing here, but they need to go down. So again, I don't allow corrections there. They need to get it right first time every time. And do it slowly. So they've got time to think and to work it into their muscle memory. And then, and of course with that last octave stretch at the bottom, just a single note for small hands. Just the low A is quite enough for them to do. And in terms of reading those low notes, you'll be able to see that they're having to read a low A at that point. So they're going from E down to low A, and in the final chord, reading the octave A's. So I've got a couple of ways that I handle reading low notes. One is to, especially if we look first at the last chord, the low A's as octaves, the student will probably be able to read, or they should be able to read the top note because they've had it all the way through this piece anyway, so they can read the A for the top note. I like them to have a guess at what they think the bottom note's going to be based on logic. You know, what key is this piece in? So if it's in the key of, if hopefully they've worked out and they know already it's in A minor, what note is it likely to end on in the bass at the bottom? And it's most likely to land on A, so let's play it and see if that works and see if it sounds right. And then I'll get them to back it up by counting backwards from that low A on the bottom space of the stave to count back and just double check that it is a low A. The other thing is to have them to look at the distance between the two notes. My students are all very comfortable with reading fifths. They can see they go from a line, skip a line and go to another line, or go from a space, skip a space and go to another space. So they can see here straight away that it's not a fifth because it's way, way too far apart for that. They can also see that it can't be a seventh because it's not going from a line to a line or a space to a space. So they can take a guess at either a sixth or an octave. The other thing is if you come back to the bar beforehand where it goes from the E down to the low A, that's where they're first going to read this note. So they may be able to, it's always harder for students to see notes when they're not underneath each other, when they're not harmonic intervals but they're melodic intervals. It's harder for them to see where the distance between the interval. But if they can see that that goes from a line, skips a line and down to another line, they can see straight away it's a fifth, which in my studio I call a handspan. So students know that they're moving a handspan, that's a fifth, and that's as far as their hands naturally sit on the keys. So again, I would have them just count those down so that they are double checking that it is the correct note. And if these are difficult notes for them to read, once they've worked them out, I have them shade them lightly with a coloured pencil. In this case, my colours for low A or for any A are A, apple red. So they would shade them lightly as red, and they've done the work, so now they can just play that next time they come to it. They know it's red, they know it's A, and they can see it at a glance, and it helps them to recognise the notes ongoing with other pieces as well when they know that 3 lines down in the bass is an A. Okay, so I think that's probably it for Samantha Dances the Tarantella. We don't have any pedal in this piece, so that makes life a bit easier. And I hope you found this tutorial helpful and that this will be a useful addition to your teaching repertoire. And maybe give you some other techniques that you can work on in addition to just having fast, furious pieces that the children want to play, or that any of your students want to play. Samantha Dances the Tarantella and a pinch of this, a dash of that are available from Wirrapang at www.australiancomposers.com.au, both in digital format and in hard copy.